3 days later, I rolled my suitcases into the Austin airport, this time for my own departure. No one came to see me off. No coffee in hand from Mom, no quiet nod from Dad. Just me, my boarding pass to London, and the sound of rolling wheels on tile. When the plane lifted off, Austin shrank beneath the clouds. With it, the weight I'd been carrying since that morning in their driveway began to fade. I spent the first week in a small flat near Hyde Park. No late-night calls to fix someone's crisis. No guilt trips about helping family. Just silence, the good kind. Every so often, I'd glance at the framed photo of me and my parents from years ago. I didn't hate them. I wasn't even angry anymore. But I understood now you can love people and still need distance from the parts of them that hurt you. London became my reset button. Morning, walks past the Serpentine. Evenings, exploring streets where nobody knew my name. And with each passing day, the voice in my head that once said, "You owe them," grew quieter. Some debts I'd decided weren't mine to pay anymore. It was almost 4 months before I heard my parents' voices again. The call came on a quiet Sunday morning in London. Mom sounded different, lighter, but also tired. "We asked Rick to move out," she said. I paused, letting the words sink in. What happened? Turns out, while I was gone, Rick had been using their credit card without permission over $1,500 in electronics and clothes. When confronted, he promised to pay it back when the next job came in. Dad finally asked what job. The argument ended with Rick packing his things. He left that afternoon, slamming the door behind him. "We should have seen what you saw," Mom admitted. "We were helping. But really, we were just enabling. I didn't say I told you so. Instead, I listened as Dad got on the line. 'You gave us a gift, Logan,' he said. 'We threw it away, and you made us see the cost of that choice.'" There was no anger in his voice now, only something closer to respect. That Christmas, I flew back to Austin. No Rick, just the three of us sitting around the same kitchen table where so many of our arguments had started. This time, there was laughter, plans for the future. And when Mom brought up the idea of redoing Italy the right way, I didn't say no. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about breaking people down. It's about making them see who's worth building back up. My name is Daniel Hayes, 64 years old. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado. For most of my life, I built things that lasted: bridges, schools, water systems. I spent 40 years as a civil engineer watching blueprints turn into steel and concrete. Now, the house I live in is the one I built with my own hands alongside my wife, Elaine. We started it 25 years ago, 2 stories, brick and cedar, with a wraparound porch that caught the evening sun just right. I can still see her there, sitting with a glass of iced tea, laughing about something small, something ours. She's been gone 5 years now. The house has been quiet ever since. Quiet until recently. It's the kind of neighborhood where you know your mailman's name, where the snowplow driver waves when he passes, where history clings to every fence post, and every creak of the floorboards reminds me of what I'm protecting. I'm not a man who looks for trouble, but trouble came looking for me. It came in the form of family, my own son Ethan and his wife Nora. Their smiles don't reach their eyes anymore. Their visits have gone from warm to strategic. Every question about the house feels like it's leading somewhere I don't want to go. I've seen structures fail. It always starts small, a crack here, a stress point there. But when you've spent your life studying collapse, you know when the foundation's been compromised. And standing here in my living room, I can feel it. Something's about to break. Ethan used to be different. He was the kind of kid who'd wake up early on Saturdays just to help me in the garage, handing me tools before I even asked. I taught him how to measure twice and cut once, how to do things right the first time. but somewhere along the way that boy drifted. Now, at 38, he's between jobs again. His shoulders slump a little more each time I see him, and when he talks about the future, it's always with vague plans and borrowed confidence. Nora, she's a different story. Sharp, ambitious, always dressed like she's walking into a boardroom. But behind the charm is calculation. She doesn't ask questions, she plants them. Questions about property value, insurance, the what-ifs no one brings up without a reason. When they visit, they move through my house like it's already theirs. Nora runs her hand along the banister, opens cabinets in the kitchen, comments on what could be updated. Ethan follows her lead, saying little, letting her words carry the weight. I try to see my son in him still, the boy with sawdust in his hair, grinning at a job well done. But lately, all I see is a man standing on someone else's foundation, waiting for the right moment to claim it. It's subtle, but I know the signs. A structure doesn't fall overnight, it's weakened piece by piece. And lately, every conversation with them feels like another beam quietly being removed. I don't confront them, not yet. An engineer knows you don't fix a problem by swinging wildly at it. You watch, you plan, and when the time comes, you act. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The kind where the air feels heavy, like the weather knows something you don't. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when I heard the front door open without a knock. Ethan and Nora stepped in side by side, their coats still dusted with melting snow. Nora didn't bother with small talk. "We need to have a serious discussion," she said, dropping a manila envelope onto the dining table. Her tone was calm, but there was no warmth in it. Ethan kept his hands in his pockets. He wouldn't look at me. I opened the envelope. Inside were documents, property transfer forms. My name replaced with theirs in neatly printed black ink. There was even a notary stamp, though I knew I'd never signed anything. Nora leaned forward, her eyes fixed on mine. "This will be easier if you cooperate. We'd like you to move out within 10 days. We have plans for this house." My hand stayed steady on the table. "When do you want me out?" I asked. "Immediately would be ideal," she said, "but we're being generous." I glanced at Ethan, searching for a flicker of the boy I raised. But all I saw was silence, compliance. I just smiled. Not because I agreed, because I've learned that the first response matters more than the first move, and right then I knew this wasn't my eviction. It was my countdown. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was working the way it used to when a bridge project went wrong. I sat at the dining table, the same spot where Nora had slid those papers toward me, and opened my old leather briefcase. Inside were the things most people never think to keep: receipts, contracts, renovation invoices. The kind of paper trail you build over a lifetime without realizing it might one day save you. I found the file from last year, roof repairs, and a full foundation reinforcement. Paid for entirely from my personal account. No loans, no shared expenses. My signature on every page. I started a list. Column 1, assets I'd put into this house. Column 2, proof they were mine. Outside, the snow had stopped. Denver nights get quiet in winter, so quiet you can hear the faint hum of the streetlights. I remember leaning back in my chair, feeling that silence wrap around me. Not the silence of defeat, the silence before an engineer starts to rebuild. I wasn't going to shout or threaten. That's not how you fix structural weakness. You document it, you find the stress points, and then you decide exactly where to apply pressure. By sunrise, I had a plan. Not complete, but enough to start moving pieces into place. If they thought 10 days was enough to push me out, I'd show them what 10 days could do in the hands of someone who spent his whole life building and unbuilding structures. The next morning, I left the house earlier than Ethan and Nora expected. not to run errands, not to cool off, to watch. There's a small cafe on Colfax Avenue 2 blocks from Nora's boutique. I took a corner-seat black coffee in front of me and a newspaper I had no intention of reading. From here, I could see the front door perfectly. At 9:15, she arrived. Black coat, designer handbag, phone already pressed to her ear. She spoke quickly the way people do when they're making deals they don't want overheard. She didn't go straight inside. Instead, she met a man by the curb, mid-40s, well-dressed, carrying a leather satchel. He handed her a thick envelope. She slipped it into her bag without a word, then glanced around. That's when I raised the camera in my phone and took 3 quick shots. Clear, close, date and time stamped. An hour later, she left the cafe alone. The man was gone. She didn't notice me as she passed just another face in the crowd. I wasn't looking for gossip. I was looking for leverage. And now I had the first piece. When you've built structures your whole life, you know that collapse starts where the supports are weakest. I just needed to find the rest of her weak points. And Ethan, he'd have his turn. But one problem at a time. By the weekend, I had enough to start pulling threads, and I knew exactly where to tug first money. Ethan was sloppy with it, but Nora, she was careful, too careful, which usually means there's something worth hiding. I called an old friend, Mark Jennings, who'd retired from the Colorado Department of Revenue 2 years before me. We'd spent decades swapping stories about infrastructure and occasionally the people who tried to cheat it. Over coffee at a quiet diner off Federal Boulevard, I slid the photos of Nora across the table. He studied them, then gave me that slow, knowing nod. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, pulling a small notepad from his jacket. "But if she's taking unreported payments, they'll leave a trail. Cash deposits. Business income that never made it onto a tax return." Mark scribbled down a few public record search tips and the names of 2 databases anyone could access if they knew where to look. That night, I followed his instructions. It didn't take long. Her boutique had filed earnings reports for the past 3 years, but the numbers didn't match the inventory turnover. Not even close. I printed the reports highlighting every gap, every inconsistency. By the time I was done, I had a neat little file labeled Tax Evasion Potential. It wasn't enough to bring her down yet, but it was a beam removed from her foundation. And I knew exactly how many more beams I needed before the whole structure came down. By Monday, they must have sensed something. The air changed. I was in the garage sorting through old tools when my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Dad, we need to talk. Stop making this harder than it has to be." 5 minutes later, another one. "If you won't cooperate, we'll find another way." I stared at the screen, reading them twice, then setting the phone down without replying. Empty threats are like hairline cracks. They tell you exactly where the stress is building. That evening, I watched from the upstairs window as Nora pulled into the driveway. She didn't knock. She just stood there looking at the house like she was measuring it. Then she walked the perimeter slow, deliberate, taking photos with her phone. It wasn't intimidation. It was appraisal. Later, through the thin winter air, I caught her voice carrying from the porch. "He's stalling. We'll push harder." Ethan's reply was muffled, but I caught one word: lawyer. I almost laughed. Let them bring lawyers. I had evidence receipts and a patience they couldn't match. But I played along. The next morning, I started moving a few boxes into my car where they could see. Let them think I was packing. Let them believe the pressure was working. Because the more they thought they were winning, the easier it would be to take everything back. On Wednesday, I decided it was time to give them something to chew on. Not a move that screamed retaliation, just enough to make them question what they thought they knew. I drove to the Jefferson County Clerk's office. It's an old sandstone building with creaky floors and the faint smell of dust and ink. At the records counter, I requested a certified copy of the property deed, with every amendment I'd ever filed. Roof replacements, foundation work, energy efficiency upgrades, all paid from my personal accounts. When the clerk handed me the folder, I made sure the co-owner rights section was on top. Then, on my way home, I made a very deliberate stop at Ethan's office. He looked up from his desk when I walked in, surprised. "Brought you something," I said, placing the folder right in front of him. "Thought you might want to understand what you're trying to take." He didn't touch it, didn't even open it. Just stared at me, his jaw tightening. "What are you playing at, Dad?" I smiled. "Nothing, just keeping the record straight." By the time I got home, Nora's SUV was parked across the street. She was inside phone pressed to her ear eyes on my front door. She didn't know it yet, but the panic had started. Because the moment you show someone you're not afraid to stand in the open, that's the moment they realize they're the ones exposed. Thursday morning, I walked into First Mountain Bank, same branch where I'd opened Ethan's first savings account when he was 15. The marble floors still shined, but the staff had changed. I asked to see the branch manager, a sharp man named David Crane. I placed my ID, the property deed copy, and a set of joint account papers on his desk. "This account," I said, tapping the papers, "lists me as the primary. I want to restrict all withdrawals over $200 unless I approve them in writing." David skimmed the documents, nodding. "Perfectly within your rights, Mr. Hayes. I'll update it immediately." Within minutes, the change was live. Ethan and Nora's access was reduced to pocket change. They'd find out the next time they tried to pay for anything bigger than groceries. Before leaving, I opened a new account in my name only and quietly transferred my pension deposits there. Clean, untouchable. That afternoon, I made another stop, this time at the Colorado Department of Revenue's Public Submission Office. In a plain manila envelope, I enclosed the boutique's earnings discrepancies I'd uncovered with a polite note, "Potential underreporting for tax review." The clerk stamped it and tossed it into the investigation basket. No questions asked. By the time the sun dipped behind the Rockies, two things were in motion: their cash flow was strangled, and a state agency had their business in its sights. I didn't need to kick down any doors. I just had to close the right ones. By Saturday morning, the first cracks were showing. From my living room window, I saw Ethan pacing the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp. I didn't need to hear the words to know what it was about bank calls have a tone all their own. At noon, I caught sight of Nora through the front blinds, storming out of the boutique with a folder clutched tight against her chest. She got into her SUV and drove off, fast tires squealing. By evening, confirmation arrived. A voicemail from Ethan, his voice tight but shaking. "Dad, the bank says we can't make withdrawals without you. This is ridiculous. Call me back now." I didn't. The next day, I happened to pass the boutique on my way to a hardware store. Two men in suits were inside, flipping through files, while Nora stood off to the side, arms crossed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The state had moved faster than even I expected. That night, I heard them arguing through the thin winter air. "You said we had time," Ethan snapped. "I didn't think they'd look that closely," Nora shot back. "Well, now we can't pay the mortgage, the store's under review," and the rest was swallowed by a slammed door. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first real proof that the structure was starting to sway. And when a building sways, you don't need to push hard. You just need to keep watching for the moment it tips. Monday morning, I decided to make my presence felt. Not through confrontation, through precision. I stopped by the same cafe on Colfax where I'd first watched Nora. This time, I sat at a table in full view of the window. When she walked in, her smile froze. I didn't wave, I didn't speak. I just sipped my coffee and slid a manila folder onto the table thick enough for her to notice, thin enough for her to wonder. She ordered to go and left without touching her drink. Good. The less she knew, the more her mind would work against her. That afternoon, I mailed 2 envelopes. One to the bank's mortgage department, reminding them of the property's co-owner status and requesting copies of any late payment notices. The other, addressed to Nora, containing a single page, a highlighted line from her earnings report that didn't match her tax return. No threats, no explanation. Just the discrepancy. By evening, the reaction came. Through my upstairs window, I saw Ethan pacing their kitchen, gesturing wildly, while Nora sat rigid, staring at the paper in her hands. Sometimes the best pressure isn't applied all at once. It's letting them feel the weight grow ounce by ounce until they start breaking under it. And they were breaking. I didn't need to hear their words. The look on their faces told me everything. By Thursday, I knew the time for small cuts was over. It was time to take out the main support beam. I started with a visit to Henderson and Lewis, a law firm downtown that specialized in property disputes. My attorney, Lisa Harmon, had already reviewed my documentation, every receipt, every improvement record, every bank transfer tied to the house. "Daniel," she said, sliding the papers back to me, "you have a rock-solid case. We can file for immediate possession based on your financial stake in the joint ownership clause." We filed that morning. The motion was fast-tracked, the court date less than a week away. But I wasn't done. That afternoon, I sent an anonymous package to the Colorado Department of Revenue's Enforcement Division, this time including not only the earnings discrepancies, but also photos of Nora's suspicious curbside meeting with the man and the envelope. I didn't have to prove what was inside. The image was enough to start questions, and questions were enough to stall her business entirely. By evening, my phone buzzed. A court clerk left a message, "Mr. Hayes, your filing has been accepted. Please prepare for a preliminary hearing on Tuesday." Through the blinds, I saw Ethan slam his car door so hard the alarm chirped. Nora trailed behind him, face-pale phone pressed to her ear. They didn't know the exact move I'd made, but they knew something was coming. And this time it wouldn't be a nudge. It would be the floor dropping out from under them. By Monday night, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a dull knife. I sat in my living room, blinds half open, watching the shadows move in the house across the street. Ethan's pacing was frantic now, his silhouette cutting sharp angles against the walls. Nora was on the phone, her back stiff, one hand pressed to her temple. Around 8 p.m., headlights swept across my driveway. A black sedan stopped and 2 men in suits stepped out. They weren't police. They weren't neighbors. They were trouble. I stayed seated calm as they walked up my path and rang the bell. One of them leaned close to the glass. "Mr. Hayes, we need to talk about Ethan's obligations. Loan sharks. Not the subtle kind. The kind that makes a point by showing up uninvited." I didn't answer. Let them wonder if I was even home. 5 minutes later, they crossed the street and knocked on Ethan's door instead. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Ethan's posture collapse, shoulders rounding like a man suddenly carrying too much weight. When the men left, Nora emerged, face-pale eyes scanning the street before slamming the door. This was it. The moment right before a structure gives way when the pressure is too much and the only thing left is the fall. I didn't have to push anymore. Gravity was about to do the work for me. Tuesday morning, the courthouse in downtown Denver felt colder than the February air outside. I sat beside Lisa Harmon as the judge reviewed our evidence, page after page of receipts, contracts, and bank statements. Ethan avoided my eyes. Nora sat rigid, her lawyer whispering something she clearly didn't want to hear. Judge Phillips' voice was calm, almost bored when she delivered the ruling. Based on the presented evidence, the court recognizes Daniel Hayes as co-owner with financial priority. The defendants must vacate the property within 48 hours. The gavel struck wood. Just like that, my house was mine again. Outside the courtroom, Nora brushed past me without a word. Ethan paused, lips parting, like he wanted to speak, but no sound came. I let him go. 2 days later, I unlocked my front door for the first time in months. The air inside was stale, but it was mine. I placed fresh flowers in Helen's crystal vase the way she used to. I dismantled their scheme without breaking the law, without becoming what they accused me of being. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. And justice felt better than I expected. 3 days after the court's ruling, my phone rang. Ethan's number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Dad. His voice was hoarse, heavy. We're leaving town. Nora's business is done. The bank's calling in debts. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. Silence can be more powerful than words. You were right, he continued, about all of it. I thought I was protecting my family, but I was just protecting my pride. Finally, I spoke. Ethan, forgiveness is easy. Trust, that's harder. You'll have to earn that back if you ever want it. I understand, he said quietly. Goodbye, Dad. When the call ended, I stood in my kitchen looking at Helen's vase on the table, fresh lilies glowing in the morning light. She told me once there's a difference between making someone pay and making things right. I'd finally understood what she meant. Justice had been served. My home was mine again, and I'd walked away without losing who I was. To anyone listening to this, maybe you've been wronged. Maybe you've thought about revenge. But remember, real strength is getting justice without becoming the thing you hate. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of betrayal, resilience, and victory, stay here with me. Hit that subscribe button. Because some stories you just can't forget.